Nora Mary Vincent was an American writer. She was a weekly columnist for the Los Angeles Times and a quarterly columnist on politics and culture for the national gay and lesbian news magazine, The Advocate. She was a columnist for The Village Voice and Salon.com. Her writing appeared in The New Republic, The New York Times, The New York Post, The Washington Post, and other periodicals. She gained particular attention in 2006 for her book, Self-Made Man, detailing her experiences when she lived as a man for 18 months. The experience led Vincent to have a nervous breakdown, and she fell into a deep depression. Nora was a radical feminist who believed that men had a much easier life than women. She set out to prove that hypothesis by disguising herself as a man for 2 years. In her book about the experience, she explains that she actually learned that men have it harder. In fact, the experience was so bad, she had to stop at 18 months because she was starting to hate women due to how badly the women treated her when they thought she was a man. Vincent also stated that she had gained more sympathy and understanding for men and the male condition. Men are suffering. They have different problems than women have, but they don't have it better. They need our sympathy, they need our love, and they need each other more than anything else. They need to be together. Nora died by assisted suicide at a clinic in Switzerland on July 6, 2022, aged 53. Her death was not reported, however, until August 2022.
Dope. Hold on, y'all. I'm sorry. Yeah, my wife got people coming over, the door vibrating and shit. I'm all miscombobulated. What's happening, everybody? What's good? What's good? Happy Wednesday. Y'all know what time it is. It's time for reading. For reading, you heathens. If you want to hide something from black people, put it in a book. So we reading books. Self-Made Man by Nora Vincent. You guys see the intro? We got an hour. It's good with you, RBN. I see you. Hold on. Let me give you what I owe you, bro. Bow. Okay, let's see who in the building. We'll get it started. My beautiful sister, the Queen Mother, take heed. How are you, ma'am? I pray you're having a great week. Shout out to you and your husband. Music Man is in the building. What's popping? What's popping? Just Do Boxing. One of the best boxing channels on YouTube, hands down, bar none. When you want non-biased boxing talk, make sure you subscribe to Just Do Boxing on YouTube. And my brother from another mother like no other, Real Bravado Network, right? So we going to get to reading. If they get here, they get here. If they don't, they don't. Y'all know how we do it. If not, catch us on the replay gang. First and foremost, I want to thank you guys all for your time for this hour. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. I want to thank all you guys for your time and support. If you're feeling froggy, if you want to give a little something to the lunch money, $ at RDubs, AREDUBBZ, Cash App RDubs, or Super Chat. So I get that check on the 21st, whichever you prefer. Celebrated 24 years. I'm not going to say celebrated, but experienced 24 years of marriage. This week on the 22nd, me and my wife been married for 24 years. We had a good night. We ate dinner and went to bed. Did some cuddle time. Y'all know how that go. Yeah, man, I like keeping it simple. We like keeping it simple. It's not just about me. It's about her too. So shout out to my wife, Angela Denise. Thank you for everything you do for me. Thank you for being here for me. And thank you for loving me for me at this point in my life. Fred G, that's why I fucks with you, boy. What's good with you, man? What's happening with you, my man Fred G? You know what I'm saying? One of the more mature-minded young fellas on this thing. How you doing, God? Peace to you, man. So let's get into it, man. We only got an hour. It's 8:11. We out of here at 9:11. We left here on page 155 last week. This is when she went to the monastery and things starting to go awry. So these will be in a playlist in numeric order. So if you want to catch up, just go back. We on page, I think it's either 7 or 8. I don't know. I'll correct it once I post it. But if you want to read the book, no need to go buy it. No need to go buy it. Real Bravado. Go ahead and cancel it, right? Just watch the video. Save yourself some time. That's the point of doing it. But, if you want the book, knock yourself out. Page 155. Let's get it, y'all. Novices had, it seemed, to be as sturdy as the foliage. Is my mic okay, first and foremost? I'm sorry, guys. Is my mic okay? Can I get a 1 if the mic's okay, please? Hey, if you need a custom beat, make sure you check out my brother right here, DJ Witch Doctor, bruh. Get at him on Instagram, DM him, DJ Witch Doctor on Instagram. He will put a beat that nobody else has for you together at a reasonable cost. He's a great man to do business with, part of the Untouchables. So if you don't know who the Untouchables is, you're missing out. A great community here on YouTube, right? Make sure y'all check out my man, DJ Witch Doctor, if y'all need any custom beats, melodies, or anything for your pages. He is the man to talk to. Expected, unexpected. What's happened with you? Almanaz, hey sis, how you doing, boo-boo? Miss Mary, how are you? Let's get it going, man. Let's get it going. I appreciate the cash app too, bro. He said, salute Uncle Rick and congrats to you and an auntie. Bless up. Yeah, man. Thanks, man. It's crazy, man. Times go by fast, man. That's why I keep trying to tell y'all, spend your time wisely. Just Dario, my man in the building, always coming through with the support. I rock with you, my guy. Ebo Sosa in the building with the fireball. I appreciate you, brother. How you doing, man? Everything good? Everything G with you? And I got what I got for you, man. I just ain't put it in the mail yet. I'm procrastinating, bro. Don't go buy one, Ebo. I got you. Please believe me. I just be bullshitting. I got you. Okay. So we on page 155 up at the top, guys, where we left off from last week. Novices had, it seemed, to be as sturdy as the foliage to make it on Father Fat's watch. The way Virgil told it, if you were a novice and Father Fat saw you weren't doing well where you were, he'd move you to a spot where you'd get more light or shade. If he saw that you needed watering or pruning, he'd do that. But he wasn't going to stand over you or check on you every day. He'd let you take your course and make a slight adjustment periodically if necessary, but that was about it. Yes, ma'am. All mine. Thank you. That was his intellectual style too, guys. He was brilliant, a mathematician by training, but an obvious polymath, well-versed enough in pretty much anything to do a crossword like he was just filling out a form. But he didn't feel the need to beat you over the head with his brain power. What he knew, he converted into a quiet wisdom. He never interrupted or overwhelmed. He never tried to convince. He offered. He suggested. And his suggestions were so profoundly right, so purely expressed, that they made you feel by comparison like a donkey who'd been temporarily granted the power of speech. He was a benign, almost avuncular presence when you got to know him, but a formidable one, never to be trifled with by the likes of Cyril or Jerome. I had the impulse to hug him, but out of sheer respect, I didn't dare. Still, as much as the monks disdained it, and as flat as it fell, the hugging idea wasn't altogether without merit. Actually, it was just what the doctor might have ordered. This revelation came to me while talking the first time with Father Henry. DJ Vapor's in the building. I see you, God. How you been, bro? Appreciate you coming through, my guy. DJ Vapor's in the building. DJ Vapors. Still, as much as the monks disdained it, and as flat as it fell, the hugging idea wasn't altogether without merit. Actually, it was just what the doctor might have ordered. This revelation came to me while talking the first time with Father Henry. Father Henry was dying of prostate cancer. He'd had all the chemo and radiation his body could tolerate, and the doctors had told him that there was nothing else they could do for him. What's good, Ronan? I see you, bro. He was very sick, but he could still get around. He still went every Friday to one of the local maternity wards to participate in a cuddling program for premature infants. He and the other volunteers would each hold one of the infants for several hours, stroking and snuggling, and talking to them in an effort to increase their chances of survival. When Father Henry was explaining all of this to me in the rec room one night, I said, "Wow, that's amazing. Maybe I could join you sometime. I could really use some cuddling right about now." Virgil shot Felix a look. I felt suddenly exposed, embarrassed, once again in a way that I would never have allowed anyone to make me feel in another context. I might have protested had I not been a young man surrounded by other men who, I could tell by their shared looks, were now deeply suspicious that I was gay and needy and undisciplined and suppressing those tendencies. I, in turn, was duly becoming the young guy who would be shamed into eschewing emotional admissions. The weight of my brother's disapproval would assure it or mangle me in the process. This I hadn't expected. I hadn't thought that I could really become Ned so fully as to feel embarrassed by the conjecture of monks, or to smart under the sting of their disapproval. Yet it was precisely that experience, the immediacy of it, that led me to see and understand the dynamic of fraternal acceptance and rejected that underlay the community and define the emotional well-being of its members. Let's stop. Fellas, what this sound like? Don't this sound like other men judging other men and holding them accountable in some form? That simply by looks and change the tone amongst men, right? That we can check a man, put a man into a certain position to make them aware of something that's going wrong with them. Or that, let's say, because you might not deem it wrong with you, but everybody in the circle deems incorrect. This thing that society and women say just doesn't exist amongst men. When men know, it's so natural, it doesn't have to be mentioned. What's understood doesn't have to be explained, correct, gentlemen? You know why? Because it's imbued to us from the time we're able to walk and stand up and pee by ourselves. K. Williams, bro, don't worry about it, bro. All of these will be in numerical order in a playlist. I'm gonna make sure I correct them tonight. Just go back in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It'll lead you all up in the book so you can catch up, bro. That's the whole point of this. So you ain't got to go spend your $15. I got you. And it's an interesting read. It really is. Okay. Feeling it at work in myself, I began to see it at work in the others too, though in them it was much more skillfully disguised than it would ever be in me. Even with years of practiced stoicism behind him, hardened Virgil hadn't quite been able to hide from inferior Ned how much he needed the approval of his peers. One day, towards the end of my stay, he received the news that he was to be allowed to take solemn vows. He came to my room electrified with pride. He'd been distant for days, but now he wanted me to share in his joy. Not the joy of his impending profession, but as he emphasized, the joy of his inclusion. He had been, she's bothering me with this, guys. In my opinion, while she's giving her opinion, it's a misrepresentation. It's not really about inclusion. It's really about survival. There's not, it's not about inclusion. Inclusion is too much of a social construct. It's about survival. Because what happened when men are among men and there's an outcast, the man is either cast out or he's destroyed. Something that most women are not capable of. Right? And the reason is because women are so, they're such social creatures that it's almost like a nightmare to them to even fathom how men really work under the surface layer. Y'all know what I'm saying? It's not about inclusion. It's not about being included. If there was no threat, right? If there was no threat, a man could care less about inclusion. It's about survival. He had been voted in by his brothers. They had accepted him as one of their own. These men, with whom he lived for 3 years, had deemed him worthy enough to spend the rest of his life with them. The vows he was taking were in a certain symbolic sense collective nuptial vows, not so much to God, but to this band of brothers who lived together in sickness and in health and buried each other south of the church. This, I felt sure, was closely connected to these men's decisions, not only to take the vow of chastity, but to enter the monistic way of life instead of becoming priest. It was an entirely legitimate way for men to marry other men. Y'all, let's read this again. This, I felt sure, was closely connected to the men's decisions not only to take the vow of chastity, but to enter a monastic way of life instead of becoming priests. It was an entirely legitimate way for men to marry other men, to cultivate the lifelong company of their own sex. And this held true for both hetero and homosexuals. It was the one thing all the monks appeared to share in common: a deep desire for fraternal and paternal approval and support, and almost inconsolable need for a bonded male family. And this is coming from a lesbian.
Did you hear what I said?
Like I said in last week's read, right? You see how her perception that she projects it onto everybody of what her understanding of lesbianism is. Isn't what she said the exact thing that lesbians do? But they go one beyond, right? Because sex is involved when you're a lesbian, correct? Miss Mary, let's make it make sense, sis. Fred said, straight men catch hell from gay men, gay women, straight women, bro. Let's carry on. What do I know? Homosexuals found it convenient, presumably because they could thereby avoid committing the grave sin of sodomy. In theory, at least, while at the same time enjoying all male domestic arrangements and avoiding the dreaded expectations of normal heterosexual experience. Where's my phone in here? Oh yeah, it's right there. I'm like, what the hell? This thing keep buzzing. Hold on, y'all. I'm sorry. Let me put it on do not disturb. I'm like, why is this thing buzzing? Like I got some business with somebody, bro. Don't leave me alone. My phone stay dry. Ain't no need for y'all to be trying to call me. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Where was we at? Homosexuals found it convenient, presumably because they could thereby avoid committing the grave sin of sodomy, in theory, at least, while at the same time enjoying all male domestic arrangements and avoiding the dreaded expectations of normal heterosexual existence, intimacy with the woman. Heterosexuals, too, saw the appeal of marrying other men. Several other monks with whom I spoke about chastity gave me the impression that women weren't creatures they could handle on any level. These guys weren't gay. They just didn't want the emotional demands and constant struggles of navigating the opposite sex. Neither did you. They were Henry Higgins types, confirmed old bachelors. They wanted to be among their own kind, to be understood and left mostly alone to go about their business without a hectoring wife bearing down on them. But, and this was crucial, they didn't want to be lonely. One monk told me, I tried that living alone and it didn't work. Life in the abbey was a little like life in a college dorm. And for certain personality types, it could offer the perfect solution to sexual alienation and loneliness. It was, in many ways, a much easier life than the alternatives, a lot less stressful, a lot less involved, especially if you were the kind of man who didn't want to cook or clean up after himself and who thought of women as a separate, intolerable species. But therein also lay the rub. Living among the guys at the Abbey had its downside too. The nurturing influence that women could provide, the communicative skills that they could lend and foster were lost to these men, and much to their emotional detriment. Most of them were hurting inside, needing each other's consolation, but utterly unable to communicate those pains and needs, much less to offer consolation in return. Father Claude was a perfect example of this sad dynamic at work. At 82, he was the second oldest monk in the monastery. Emotionally speaking, he was old school. You weren't going to get him to talk about his feelings. Or at least that's what I thought at first. And I got the impression that that's what the other monks had thought for a long time, probably with good reason. Claude had been the novice master at one time, and Virgil had told me that he was tough in that role, emotionally tough. That is to say, he's not a hugger. Virgil said that when he was a novice, back when he first came to the monastery, one time while they were walking together, Virgil put an affectionate hand on Claude's shoulder, the way you do when you're talking animatedly with someone you like. Virgil said, "You've never seen anybody pull away so fast and furiously." I first met Father Claude in the woodworking shop of one of those days early on, when I was helping Virgil with the coffins. Claude tended the vegetable garden and the beehives, which were both located in a small clearing about 50 yards from the shop. He used to come into the shop now and then for a break and a chat. He'd stand there wiping away the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief, his face and hands covered with liver spots, his baggy work clothes hanging off his slight frame, his blue eyes rheumy with old age. He and Virgil had an affectionate, bantering report on that consisted on Virgil's end mostly of references to Claude's extreme old age and questionable compos mentis. And on Claude's end, compos mentis is his mental state. And on Claude's end, mostly of snide remarks about Virgil's youthful sass and ineptitude. The game endeared both of them to me. After one of Claude's visits, Virgil said, "He could be a little silly sometimes. We have a joke about him. We say, when Father Claude goes senile, how will we know?" It was one of Virgil's sweet jests, full of awkward, untranslatable love. I made a point of visiting Claude after that. With great pride, he showed me his garden and his hives. He said he had probably been stung hundreds of times in his life, either gathering honey or transferring hives. But he said it never bothered him. He just loved bees. He could talk about them for hours, tell you anything you wanted to know. The other monks called the bees his six-legged friends, and I suppose talking about them was Claude's version of talking about the weather, a neutral banter that made him comfortable. But as I spent more and more time with Father Claude, asking him questions and walking with him in the garden, he began to open up a bit. He did have things to say if you probed him. Maybe it was old age, the mellowing that happens to some people. Maybe it was my feminine approach, even if he didn't recognize it as such. Whatever it was, he told me things about his childhood, gave me images that I'll never forget. And in the end, he said the most intimate, heartbreaking thing that anyone there ever said to me. One night in the rec room, I asked him if he'd ever regretted becoming a priest. I think this took him by surprise because almost as a reflex, he said no, but not in a defensive way, but in a puzzled way, as if he never really considered it. But then the next day, he found me in the refectory at the end of lunch and he leaned over and said, "You know, I've been thinking about what you asked me yesterday, and I remember something a fellow priest once said to me. He said, 'You know, sometimes I wish we were novices again.' And I asked him, 'Why is that?' 'Because it was such a wonderful time.' And he said, 'No, because then I could quit.'" Father Claude chuckled at the memory and squeezed my arm. I laughed and took him by the shoulder and said fondly, "Father Claude, I really like you so much. You give me hope." "Oh, thank you," he said, tilting his head down slightly towards the floor. "I wish my brothers felt that way." I couldn't believe he said this. It was supposed to be the kind of thing Father Claude would never say or feel. "Don't they?" I asked. Pursing his lips together in a rueful, pain half frown, he said, "They don't seem to." Even Stead, Father Claude, the once commanding novice master who wouldn't suffer a friendly touch on the shoulder, a man who had chosen to spend his entire adult life in this very same cloister, even he was without fellowship in the inn, without the sense that his confreres esteemed him. Page 161, guys, at the top. This made me wonder how esteem was truly won and lost between the brothers. I knew from Virgil that being accepted in the community was an enormous affirmation. Presumably, it had been so far for all the monks. But I also knew from Virgil and had gathered from other comments Felix had made that there was at least one monk among them who had lost the respects of his brothers. No one was indiscreet enough to name him at first, but as my stay extended and Ned's own troubles with the esteem mill grounded on, I found out who it was and why the other monks thought less of him. The subject first arose one day in the shop. Virgil mentioned that one of the other monks, Brother Crispin, was suffering from depression and taking medication for it. He's depressed because he feels the rest of us don't respect him, he said. And he's right. We don't. Yet he keeps doing the very things that lost him our respect in the first place. The implications was that if Crispin just got off his ass, he gained their respect and poof, no more depression. Felix, I found, shared Virgil's dislike for Crispin. Some people, he interjected during a conversation we were having about life at the Abbey, would rather take Prozac than deal with their problems. We were taking a drive together that afternoon. I already see where this is going. I didn't have access to a car. So in an effort to spend some private time with him and to get to know him better, I asked him to take me out for the day, and he agreed. It was then that I learned how wrong I was about him, how I'd misjudged him. Despite his remark about Crispin, he wasn't at bottom of brusque, cutting bully I'd taken him for. On the contrary, he was very kind and open with me. We talked about emotional life at the monastery, and he admitted that there were serious problems with intimacy in the community. Most of the monks, he said, were incapable of talking about their feelings with each other, or for that matter, discussing anything more than sports and the weather. They were typical guys in that respect. It's possible, he said, in a monastic setting like this to go 20 years or more without speaking to someone and not know why. But, he emphasized, there was a lot of forces militating against good communication skills, aside from all the emotionally repressive socialization that men of their generation traditionally underwent. The older monks had the added burden of being trained from seminary on not to socialize with each other. Getting them to loosen up now would mean contravening everything they knew. He told me that in the old pre-Vatican II days, the novice monks were forbidden to spend time alone with each other. They were forbidden to go anywhere in groups of less than 3. Partly, the idea behind the rules had been to foster a sense of community, but the more pressing concern had been to remove the temptation of inappropriate intimacy. Okay, so what the fuck? Look. So let's clarify. ATX, what's good, bro? So let's clarify. See, where is it at? Hold on, y'all. Hold on. Where's the fuck this bitch just? Excuse my language. Where's it at? Where's it at? Okay. Here we go. Now look. So if we go back to the beginning verse or the beginning paragraph on page, the end of paragraph and beginning paragraph on 161 and 162. I'm gonna read it, right? I'm gonna read it. Listen up, guys. This what I'll be talking about, right? You got to pay attention. You got to know what people are saying. We talked about emotional life at the monastery, and he admitted that there were serious problems with intimacy. So what do you mean? What is intimacy in this source, right? But then when you talk about inappropriate intimacy between the brothers, so what intimacy are you talking about? Are you talking about what you're trying to push on as emotional intimacy between the men? Or sexual intimacy? Is anybody picking up what I'm putting down, or am I off? She doesn't clarify either, right? Because she wants to push her agenda of sexual intimacy between the same sexes. There were serious problems with intimacy in the community. Because that's what she keeps saying. The men need to be intimate with each other, right? They need to be able to share their feelings and emotions. But then it's an understanding of inappropriate sexual intimacy. Let's keep it going. Let's see what she say to try to cover up her tracks. Inappropriate intimacy wasn't entirely a euphemism for gay sex. The monks were supposed to avoid deep friendships or platonic attachments of any kind with anyone of either sex, lest these attachments come between them and God and create competing loyalties within the group. So your thesis is flawed, dummy. So why is she continuing to push this intimacy between when the mission's supposed to be you getting closer to the Most High? That's why you're in a monastery, right? That's why you're there amongst other men, right? So you don't have the temptation of women and the things of the world, so you can get closer to God, right? But instead of saying this at the beginning, instead of saying this as her premise from the beginning, she had to build us up with all this homosexual tension that supposedly is within the monasteries. Now this woman downstairs and ain't answering her door. Y'all hold on. What is that blink? I'm sorry, guys. Bear with me. What y'all want? Y'all got a delivery service? So you got a delivery service? All right, hold on. I'm coming. Give me a second, guys. I got to run downstairs real quick because she got it. Because some people out. Okay, let me get back to it, guys. My apologies, guys. Okay, where was I at? Intimacy between the brothers. Inappropriate intimacy wasn't entirely a euphemism for gay sex. The monks were supposed to avoid deep friendships or platonic attachments of any kind with anyone of either sex, lest these attachments come between them and God or create competing loyalties within the group. But as Felix put it, sexual tension was a pressing and ubiquitous near occasion of sin nonetheless. And the rules existed largely to keep the men out of temptation's way. He spoke of a growing generational divide between the older and younger monks. Listen up, guys. Told you, I know where she's going. He spoke of a growing generational divide between the older and younger monks. Moreover, he said that a number of the young novices they had in recent years have found it as difficult as I had to integrate themselves into the community, and for similar reasons. the emotional removal of so many of its members, the institutionalized stifling of harmless intimacies, spontaneous affections, and even, dare one say it, joy. I wouldn't say joy, I'd say happiness. Doesn't that sound like what the young boys be saying about the OGs, y'all? The divide's so big. You guys always, you know what I'm saying? The stuff they be using. Oh, you guys don't want to feel nothing. You guys are all tough. You guys, it's crazy. As Felix spoke, I remember Father Fat telling me about one failed novice who had been caught keeping a kitten concealed in his room, a serious no-no. For my part, it has struck me right away as a noticeable lack that the monastery harbored no pets of any kind, even outdoor ones, which the grounds could surely have accommodated. I asked about it and was told that it was a matter of policy and one that now didn't seem at all incongruous with the somewhat stunted emotional life of the abbey. Felix got a little defensive then. I'm gonna sum this chapter up at the end as simple as I can, guys, and y'all let me know if y'all agree with it. You might be tempted to think that we don't even like each other, but there's a lot about this community that an outsider doesn't see. A lot that goes on beneath the surface that makes us a community. I knew this was true, partly because I had learned so much already about the silent quality of male friendships, but also because I had heard other monks speak about these hidden intimacies. They spoke of knowing other monks by the sound of their footsteps in the hallways, or knowing that Felix himself always sneezed in groups of 4. Even in my short time at the Abbey, I had learned to recognize Virgil's shuffling, slippered gait as he passed my door on the way to and from the bathroom. I could see how there might be a million tiny intimacies like that between these men, great kindnesses given in passing, but they could not entirely replace what wasn't there. They weren't meant to. That's what women are for, stupid. Felix admitted as much. As he told it, he had once been more open to and even attempted more direct emotional contact. Marcus, what's good, my guy? How you doing, bro? Peace, God. Felix admitted as much. As he told it, he had once been more open to and even admitted more direct emotional contact with his confreres. But he said he'd gotten hurt and had since shut himself down. As I asked him questions about himself, and as he spoke and revealed more of his private thoughts to me, and saw that I was open to receiving them, I could see his doctored, imperious persona falling away. I could feel his loneliness, his need for intimacy, so long suppressed, pushing out like palms of someone's hands against the window of a sinking car. He was still alive in there, in fact, intact behind the dejection and neglect. Thank you, bro. That's why I knew that when he said some people would rather take Prozac than deal with their problems, he was really saying, does Crispin think he's the only one here who's in pain? It was also just the old masculine reflex, the same one that Virgil had had. To them, Crispin was weak and he was using a pill to do what he should have been resolute enough to do for himself. But there was, I thought, also a touch of envy in their judgments. He had had the courage to cry out. I was curious to know how Brother Crispin saw all this. So finally, I decided to go and see him. I hadn't spoken more than a couple of words to him since I'd been at the Abbey. He was very quiet, the kind of person who disappears in a group. I simply hadn't noticed him much. Now I knew why, and I felt bad about it. He was seriously overweight by a good 75 pounds or so. In the almost ashamed, self-deprecating way he seemed to inhabit his flesh. You can see the magnitude of his isolation and unhappiness written all over him. His black hair was shaped in the old bowl cut monk style minus the tonsure. The bangs were blunt and high over his forehead. He was he was pasty, and his face was defenselessly young. Despite his 41 years, you could still almost see the eighth grader in him. My apologies, guys. Whatever anger Crispin felt had turned inward, as it so often does in depressives, and he presented a meek, defeated front, his shoulders sagging down and in as if to shield the solar plexus, his gait lumbering and slow. He worked in the library, literally barricaded in by the books. They were piled all around him, though I doubted he had the energy or focus to read them. I knew I didn't when I was depressed. I know you didn't, girl. I know you didn't. I know you did. Getting him to talk was work, but we finally came around to the topic of his depression, and he said he'd been on Prozac, but he switched to Zoloft. I asked him when the depression had started. He said that a few years back, during one of the periodic gatherings in which the monks discussed community business, he lost it. He said he just stood up and screamed at everybody, finally unleashing years of suppressed discontent. It was hard to tell from what he said whether the scene had precipitated a genuine breakdown in him or whether the monks seemingly deemed that kind of public display of uncontrolled emotion psychotic under any circumstances. In any case, Crispin said that after the incident, he'd gone away for a while, quote unquote. Again, it was hard to know whether he went to an actual mental ward in a hospital or to a special monistic retreat facility, and whether he'd gone of his own accord or whether he'd been sent. I got the impression he'd been sent, but Crispin was reluctant to say more, and I didn't want to push him on the question. I could see my own story in Crispin's. Just being in that place for a few weeks, I'd already begun to feel that if I'd really been a young man considering this life, or if I'd been young enough not to know better and had joined in a fit of visionary zeal, I'd have been healed and reduced just as surely as Crispin had been. And again, it struck me that Crispin's fate was not linked primarily to the monastery, but rather to the all male environment in which he lived, the only difference being one of degree. Far, far worse would have happened to him in prison or the military, where the weakest are always weeded out or trampled by the strong. But the instinct was the same. He was at the bottom of the pile, the fat kid on the playground, the hated projection of everybody's hidden weaknesses, the shivering manifestation of failed masculinity or display. He was a grown man like Ned who hadn't had the pink properly pounded out of him. Exactly. The man had no survival skills. The man had no coping mechanisms. And like a woman, instead of helping him because you don't know how to help nor assist, what do women do? They pity these men. They coddle these men. They feel sorry for these men. And I'm not saying this is not your job to do as mothers. This is what you're supposed to do to your sons in their pre-prime years. But it's something that most women cannot get away from. This is the problem with women when it comes to sons, the difficulty of them seeing those sons as men who have to make their own way. And it's simply something that most women, especially mothers, don't understand. And I understand it. We allow grace in these situations, but there has to come to a razor's edge, a cliffhanger, a point where you have to let a male child go and find their own way. Your love cannot protect that man from the world. And what women do is y'all set y'all sons at a disadvantage. And watch, I'm not even moving on. I'm just looking at the next line, right? Everything she talked about this dude is about to turn into a pity party. It's about to be a pity party. My time with Crispin had left me feeling sad and anxious to leave the Abbey. I too had started getting depressed amid all the pain I'd uncovered, but I didn't want things to resolve themselves in this way. I didn't want to leave with nothing but a mound of bad feelings in tow. Yet I only had a couple of days left. I needed to change the tenor of my encounters. I needed someone to talk. I needed someone to talk to, someone outside of the fray. Father Fat came to my mind immediately. But outside the rec room, it was hard to command Father Fat's attention. He was very busy during the day, as most of the monks were. And if you were going to take up his time, it had better be a cosmic matter. That meant, more or less, confessing your sins. So I decided to confess my sins. It was odd to think of the confessional as being a place where you could get to know a man better. But Brother Felix knew Father Fat a lot better than I did, and he had suggested it. Doing crosswords is one way to get to know Father Richard, he said. Another is by asking him to be your confessor. Besides, I've been looking for a confessor among the monks. The burden of having lied to get into the monastery and of having continually deceived these people on a matter that would be a grievous offense to them if they knew about it had been weighing on my mind for my entire stay. I felt guilty and I wanted to come clean. 2 days before my departure, I arranged to meet Father Fat in my room mid-morning after Lauds. This is crazy when you think about it. 2 days before my departure, I arranged to meet Father Fat in my room mid-morning after the Lauds. Right on time, he knocked on my door. I asked him where we should go, and he said, "There are 2 chairs. Let's do it right here." "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," I said. "It's been longer than I can remember since my last confession." That was the only formal thing I said during the whole confession. The rest was just talk, which was exactly what I've been hoping for. It began with me expressing regret for the ill will I bore some of the monks. Then I touched on some of the points of Catholic theology that had always bothered me. He interjected things now and then, but mostly he just listened. Then I began to ask him about himself, his background, why he became a monk. With characteristic economy, he said, somewhere between becoming a policeman and becoming a cowboy, I became a priest. It was probably the most honest answer anyone there had given me. Though Father Claude hadn't said it in so many words, I gathered that he joined for a similar reason. It was a form of civil service to a certain generation, like being a soldier. If you weren't cut out for it, you did the other. But there was far more to it than that for someone as complex as Father Fat. He had gotten his degree at the local college where he and many of the monks now taught. And he said that when he was a student there, he had been very impressed by the monks he met. I thought if they got to be that kind of people, I'm sorry, I thought that if they got to be the kind of people they were by living that life, he said, then I wanted to give it a try. And if ever there was an advertisement for the life, Father Fat was it. He was an exemplary man, not by any stretch perfect, but exemplary, deeply good, deeply kind, solemn, humble, generous. I asked him about the hugging thing and the difficulty so many of the monks had it in showing affection for each other. I was curious about where he fell on that spectrum. He told me about his friendship with Father Henry, which had been a long and devoted one. He said that he went to visit Father Henry in his room or in the hospital quite often these days. They would talk for an hour or two, and then they would always hug long and hard at the end of it. I'm helping my friend to die, he said. We just sat with his last remark for a while. Father Fat had looked me right in the eye when he said it, to see if I could take it, if I'd look away or be embarrassed. I held his gaze and nodded, and we kept looking at each other for several long moments. Finally, we broke the contact, and he brought us back around to my confession. Okay, but all of that's not why we're here for, right? Or what we're here for, right? No, I said. There's something else I need to tell you, but I'm worried about telling you. I think maybe I know what it is, and it's okay. Oh, you do? That's interesting. What? You're gay. This made me laugh hard. Even he thought Ned was gay. I knew he hadn't given the time of day to Father Jerome, and I knew he didn't really concern himself about the sinfulness of anyone's sexuality. That was clear, but I was curious about where he'd gotten the idea. Well, yes, I said, I'm gay, but not in the way you think. And that's not the thing I have to tell you. But I am curious. What made you think it? Well, your mannerisms are pretty effeminate. That was rich. As a woman, no one had ever accused me of being effeminate. Here was another of Ned's tricks. Dress as a man and thereby emphasize the woman. Reveal the truth under the rubric of a lie. Father Fat went on. Okay, if it's not that you're gay, what is it? This is really bad, I said, and I'm afraid you're going to feel compelled to break the seal of the confessional when I tell you. How do you feel about the seal, by the way? I mean, if I told you I was a murderer, which is not what I'm going to tell you, but if I did, would you feel compelled to go to the law or to tell your brothers? No, he said. Still, I was going to put him in a sticky position, but I had to hope keep the confidence, even though he would have been well within his rights to tell me not to keep it, to compel me morally to disclose my wrongdoing. I knew that myself. Okay, I said finally, here goes. I'm not a man, I'm a woman. He'd been smiling his tolerant, jolly smile, and it froze on his face. Dead silence. I'm not a transsexual or anything, I went on. I'm a full biological woman and a lesbian, by the way. I came here in disguise to study and write about this community of cloistered men. It's part of a larger study I'm doing about men and women and how they are treated differently in the world. He began nodding slowly, the smile fading, but still there as a form of shock. Then very slowly he said, like Margaret Mead? Yeah, sort of. There was another silence. Then I asked, are you angry? Well, it does give me the feeling of being used. Yes, I said, I know, and I'm sorry. Do you think you can forgive me? Yes, I do forgive you, he said without hesitation. The thing is, I said, I've had real experiences here. I haven't just been an observer. And while some of them have been painful, I've undergone some spiritual change as well. And I've connected with people and myself in certain ways that I won't soon forget. He nodded. Then he started to laugh. What? I said. I was just thinking that I wish you put me in your will or something so I could tell this story. There was this one time. Well, maybe I can release you to talk about it, I said. We'll see how it goes. He gave me absolution, and he said, by the way of penance, that I should go and sit in the church and think. As we were finishing, I said, knowing I'm a woman changes everything, doesn't it? Yes, he said. See, now I can hug you, right? I couldn't have really done that before, could I? Yes, he said, and no, you couldn't have. For Father Fat, hugging a dying old friend like Father Henry was one thing. Hugging a young would-be novice was quite another. But hugging a woman friend, a family daughter who couldn't help thinking of you as a lost grandfather, that was something else altogether. Because you have a role. Because we have roles. God damn. Do your fucking job, bro. We both stood up and came together. I put my arms around his neck and my head on his shoulder. He squeezed me tightly with great affection. Thank you, I said as he walked out of the room. He smiled again. After he shut the door, I smiled too. When I looked down and saw that I had dandruff all over the front of my black sweatshirt. Later that morning, I did my penance. I went to the church and I thought about whether or not to tell Virgil and the others about my true identity. I wondered if they, too, could forgive me. I had reached the end of my run, or one end. Had I stayed longer, there would have been many more emotional disasters and reforms, because that was the designated course, a very old paradigm, and the essence of what our culture has come to think of as masculine tutelage applied roughly to the moral soul. Break a man down to build him up stronger. Find the fault in yourself and heal it. I was, after all, the one among them who had committed the greatest transgression. And in forgiving Ned so readily and completely, not only had Father Fat shown me the clarity of mind and heart that emotional self-discipline at its best could give to any man or woman able to stand up to it, he had shown me the rigors of insight that Ned had yet to find in himself. After my confession with Father Fat, I knew I needed to talk to Virgil. So on my second to last night, I arranged to meet him for some private time together. We decided to take a walk around the grounds. It took a fair amount of preliminary chatter before we got down to the real subject. Virgil was uncomfortable with what he sensed was coming, but by the time I was by this time I wasn't hiding anything anymore. And finally I just cut through. So, I said, what happened between us a while back? One day we were friends and the next it was as if you hardly knew me. Did I do something to make you angry? Did I disappoint you in some way? He deflected it calmly. No, not at all. I don't know what you mean. Oh, come on, Virgil. You do too. I didn't imagine this. Something changed radically after the first week, and I'd like to know why. We went back and forth on this for a few minutes, with Virgil claiming to have been busy and preoccupied with his coming profession and a whole host of other things unrelated to me. They were plausible explanations, but there was more to tell, and Virgil was too honest at heart to hide this very well, even in his disclaimers. Then in frustration, I said, look, just tell me the truth, even if it hurts my feelings. I really like to know. I promise. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking about me, you're wrong. Virgil didn't reply. So I went further and said the obvious. I know everybody here thinks I'm gay, but I need you to know something, and you're just going to have to take my word for it. I'm not sexually attracted to you. He interrupted here. See, the fact that you would even feel the need to say that would even enter your mind. I know. You think like everybody else that I'm in denial. The more I protest, the truer it must be, but you're just wrong. Believe me. I could tell he wasn't really buying it, but he didn't press me. So I said, never mind that for now. Tell me what it was that bothered you about me. Oh, all right, he said, relenting at last. He sighed. You were too clingy. You're like You were like this thing I just couldn't get off me. He pronounced the last four words slowly with emphasis, shaking his right hand in a flicking downward motion as if it were covered in muck. I could see it happening, he went on. I recognized the signs. As Jerome had said, Virgil felt me developing an affection for him, had assumed it to be homosexual in nature, and had taken steps to squelch it. So I was right, I said. You did back away purposely. Yes, he conceded, but look, he added, I think you've had a good influence on this community. You brought emotional awareness and the possibility of change. You're not a follower. We need that. Coming from Virgil, this was a great compliment indeed, and it confirmed for me what I had hoped had been the case. That's however much of an intrusion I had been in their lives, and however poorly I might have handled myself at times among them. I had touched these men in some way. After he said this, I felt momentarily overwhelmed by a sense of healing and possibility, a sense that for all their stoic showing, these men were warm at the center and breathing, crippled perhaps, but not nearly dead, and by no means without some hidden ability to affect me and for the better. I knew then that the time was right to tell Virgil the truth about me. Virgil, I said, I've got a confession to make. Okay, he said with complete composure. What is it? There's something about me that I haven't told you. Oh? Yeah, something important. We walked a little farther in silence, and then I turned to him. At this point, since I was on the verge of leaving anyway, I wasn't wearing my beard anymore. I hadn't been wearing it for several days. To me, it should have seemed obvious that something wasn't quite right. But this was the test of perception that continually arose with Ned. People saw in him what I had conditioned them to see. When I removed the beard, they saw nothing but a shaved boy. But I wanted to press Virgil on the point. He was perceptive, and I wanted him to see. Could wanting to reveal myself reveal me as surely as wanting to disguise myself had disguised me? Did the suggestion work both ways? Do you have an idea what it is? I asked. He thought for a minute, then ventured something he obviously been thinking for a while. You're not a Catholic, he said. This was typical Virgil. He would see heresy in a microbe before he'd see the transvestite staring him in the face. He was hardcore about his doctrine. Though being his sardonic self, he couldn't refrain from making a crack or two on the subject now and then. I remember how once while we were looking through the monastery bookshelves together for some appropriate reading for Ned and had come across the work of so and so S.J., he had reshelved it immediately, saying, No, that won't do. Why not? I said. I have some serious doubts about whether Jesuits are even Catholic, he said. I loved him for that. He was a crank and he knew it. I'd given enough of my unbelief away in theological argument over the last 3 weeks that Virgil's question didn't surprise me in the least. No, I said, I'm Catholic, all right, or I was, though you're right that I'm not anymore, or at least I'm not insofar as you can ever cease to be Catholic. Virgil glared at me over this last remark, as if I poked him with a stick, which of course I had. This was part of our game when it was on, part of what had bonded us to each other all along. Guess again, I said. Let's see. You're an escapee from a mental institution? Nope, not technically, though being a New Yorker surely counts. The monks had all been tickled by the fact that I made my home in a neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen. To them, the freak show of New York City was about as far from their home as you could get. To me, it was and it wasn't. At this point, I stopped Virgil on the path, stood facing him, and said, Look at me. It's right in front of you. Can you see it? What? He looked into my face. I see a guy with graying hair. No, that's not it, I said. Look closer. I took off my glasses. I don't know, he said, perusing me again. What is it? He was blank, puzzled. We both turned and kept walking. I tried one last thing. I'm not what I appear to be. This sank in as we rounded the corner on the footpath by the carpentry shop and began a last stretch back to the cloister. Suddenly he turned to me, the moment of revelation having come at last with full force. You're a woman. Yes, I said with relief. By now, we were in front of the Abbey. A discovery of this magnitude was going to require at least one more loop around the grounds. We kept walking. Virgil was quietly registering this information. I was watching his face. He was stealing looks at my chest. I do have them, I said, catching him mid-glance. They're just under a tight sports bra. I'm not a transsexual. I'm a woman in disguise. This seemed to answer the first question in his mind. I went on with the rest of the explanation. I am also a lesbian, I said, which you will now understand is why Ned couldn't possibly be gay and why I never wanted to sleep with you. You see? He nodded. He seemed both disappointed and relieved. I had expected the relief, but not the disappointment. There was something more to this. I told him about the book. He wasn't pleased at first for all the reasons you might expect, feeling betrayed and lied to and used. His orthodox strain kicked in, as expected, but not in the punitive way I thought it might. I had broken the seal of the cloister, and that, he reminded me, was a fairly serious breach of canon law. He suggested I go to confession on the matter. I told him that I had already had with Father Fat, and that my decision to tell him was part of my penance. Virgil accepted this on some level as right and proper, but to my great surprise, his reaction then turned personal, something I hadn't really seen in Virgil before. Why me? He asked. Why had I chosen him, singled him out for special attention? This was a question that only my female dates have ever asked me before. Because I was there, he asked, hurt, it seemed, just as the others had been, to think my interest in him hadn't been genuine. Well, yes and no. I answered truthfully, as I had answered all the others. That's why I chose to speak to you initially, because you were there. But the feelings I developed later were real. I couldn't have faked those. No way. This may sound like a con to you, but it's not. Very real and profound things can happen, and for me have happened under the cover of a falsehood. That has been the whole point of this experiment. The truths I've learned and experienced would not have revealed themselves otherwise. He agreed, it seemed, though he said nothing. He was calm, his head inclined in conference. I went on. Virgil, I said, I care a lot. That's why I'm telling you all of this, and I'm truly sorry for the lie. I hope you can forgive me. We talked on, going over the particulars, and to his credit, Virgil made it very easy for me. He was receptive, understanding, immediately forgiving, just as Father Fat had been. He showed every aspect of his best and wisest self, though he had every reason not to, and I was both admiring and grateful. Now I can tell you, I said finally, this is a really hard place to be a woman. Well, it's supposed to be, he laughed, and so did I, though I did so with an underlying sense of puzzlement. I have thought often of these comments in retrospect, and whether this is fair or not, it does, in a sense, confirm a lot of what I felt about the defeminizing of Ned and Crispin, too, in that environment. Defeminizing. You said the word yourself. I felt about the defeminizing of Ned and Crispin, too, in that environment. It was an odd answer on the face of it. In theory, living together amicably as men didn't necessitate creating an atmosphere that was hostile to women or even to femininity. But that is what the monks had done. And according to Virgil, they had done so by design. Ned's hazing hadn't been imaginary, and this consolidated masculinity that reigned so heavily in the monastery wasn't, it seemed, just a natural result of men living together without women. It was the result of men actively working to squelch any creepingly womanly tendencies in themselves and their brothers. But why? Because they're men, stupid. Why this need for such a macho atmosphere? Granted, this was workhorse machismo of a particularly tight-lipped, straight-backed, and, as Felix had said, Germanic variety. It wasn't rugby and beer, but it was machizo all the same in its need to obviate its opposite. And that seemed entirely superfluous in a way where the soul was ostensibly God's instrument. So why? Why the cultural misogyny? The answer, when it came to me, was not at all mysterious. A cliche, in fact. Felix himself had said it. They took refuge in machismo because they feared inappropriate intimacies between men. A feminized man is a gay man, or so the stereotype goes. A feminized man is a weak man, and a weak man who allows intimacies is a prey to the assertions of chaos and his libido. It seemed painfully obvious in my own particular case, the jokes, the paranoia, the shutting out. The thought that Virgil might be gay had crossed my mind before, but I hadn't been at all sure about my instincts on the matter, not nearly as sure as I had been about Jerome. But now Virgil and I were confessing to each other, so I decided to take the risk that he might be honest if only I asked him the right way. I remember him talking about his time away from the monastery, about how he said he had a really good time, as if he had done his sinning all at once at a big party. But he had been carefully non-sex specific about it. I remember another cryptic remark he had made at the time that now made a lot more sense to me. We are all God's creatures, and love is love, and sex is sex, and they are not the same thing. In other words, Lord, make me straight, but not now. I decided I had to ask, but I didn't want to make him use the word gay. He was uncomfortable with it. I sense this wasn't an interrogation, so I just asked him, as if in passing, that the people he had relationships with during his time away from the monastery had been men. The lines were open between us now. Maybe knowing I was a woman had taken away some of his fears. Enough to know that I wasn't a threat to him anymore. His physical attraction, if it had been there, would presumably have died with my disclosure, the temptation removed. He didn't resist the admission. He nodded his assent. So, you've never slept with a woman? I asked more boldly. He looked at me archly. Not that I know of. Virgil was a comic to the last, and like Father Fat and his lack of umbrage, he was a credit to his order. When it counted most, when he was sorely deceived, he was true to his commandments, to love, to forgive, and not to judge. He was also a soft touch. He let me off easy, and I was grateful. I'm sure that part of him was relieved too, and that made it easier for him to greet my news so forgivingly. When Ned became a woman, the gay problem disappeared, and with it, the transgressive masculinity he embodied, as well as the inappropriate intimacy he had provoked. When Ned became a woman, the gay problem disappeared, and with it, the transgressive masculinity he embodied, as well as the inappropriate intimacy he had provoked. That Ned provoked, right? Yeah, Ned provoked. Okay. In this context, a woman must have felt like a gift, especially since I was leaving anyway. A female was far more acceptable than a fag. She could be held at bay, her needs and emotive untidiness satisfactorily explained, then set aside. But in a man, those qualities were far more troubling. They could get inside, infiltrate, threaten, and worst of all, seduce. The odd man out was dangerous, like the slightest touch at a pressure point that could bring the whole edifice down. It was a crisis that they were well rid of. Virgil and I parted on newly intimate terms, awake to another potential in ourselves and each other. He assured me that I had a brother in him if I needed one, and I knew he meant it. A brother to a sister, easy, normal, Good. We promise to write. It's a long chapter. BZ, what's happening? No, we got a couple more pages. I'll finish the chapter out. What's good, information man? How you doing? Just I was good. We'll go ahead and finish the chapter. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 5 more pages. We'll finish this one out so we can start on a fresh chapter. Aside from Virgil and Father Fat, Felix was the only other person I wanted to visit before I left. I wanted to tell him about me, and I wanted to apologize. I saw him in the rec room and told him that I was leaving the next morning. I thanked him for our time together. Before I could say anything about my true identity, he threw his arms around me and hugged me tightly, very tightly, squeezing me with intense gratitude and immediacy. It was obvious from the way he gave it that this was a hug he had been longing to give, but hadn't given for a very long time because there had been no one willing or able to receive it. In that hug, I could feel all that was locked up in Felix and by proxy in Claude and Virgil and so many other men I had yet to meet outside the Abbey. Chill out. When we pulled apart, I told him that I had something to tell him. I sat him down and abruptly spilled the news. He sat for a second, looking at me with the shock that he was, out of politeness, trying desperately to disguise. I could tell that he was uncomfortable, but I could also tell that our friendship was undamaged. The bond that we had established was sexless, and what Felix said next confirmed this. Well, this doesn't really change anything, does it? He said this more as a statement than a question, and I agreed. It didn't, and this made him the only person in my entire career as Ned who didn't change his attitude towards me when he learned that I was a woman. We hugged again to say goodbye, and the hug was the same hug. He hadn't needed to know that I was a woman in order to give it to me the first time, and he didn't change his aspect when he gave it to me the second time, knowing full well that I was a woman. It was a small, but to me, remarkable moment and the perfect parting gift. I left the Abbey the next morning feeling renewed and positive about the real affections I had shared there. Thinking back on it now, I don't pretend that the Abbey was a normal place to go looking for male experience. The kind of place you'd expect to find a prototypical guy milling around in their element, a sports bar, say, or a bowling alley. The vast majority of American men never come within miles of a monastery, nor do they willingly relinquish their sex lives, autoerotic or otherwise. But as I said at the onset of this chapter, that is part of why I went there, to see what happens to men when they are out of their own element, when they are without the company of women. And what I found there should not, I suppose, have surprised me, but it did. In all its reductive simplicity, it did. Most American men may not be monks, but the monks I knew were certainly American men, or to modify an old adage, I found that you can take the man out of his element, but you cannot very often take the element out of the man. At the Abbey, I expected to find a breed concerned primarily with spiritual matters, a place where one style or quality of manhood was irrelevant, where the artificial socialized boundaries that stymied male intimacy in the outside world would have long since fallen away, and where locker room fears of homosexuality would be so far beneath the radar as to be inconceivable. But instead, I found a community steeped in commonplace masculine angst. I found masculinity distilled, unmitigated by feminine influences, and therefore observable in a concentrated state. These men were suffering together in silence under a hurt they could barely acknowledge, let alone address. The cause of their distress and dysfunction mostly eluded them, yet to an outsider it was perfectly clear. Or at least it was to an outsider like me who had lived a woman's life and then had been subjected to their treatment as a boy. I lived in the cloister among them, as one of them, yet I remained myself. And from that peculiar point of view, I could see them both from the inside and the outside at once. The contrast was stark. I felt firsthand the loss of the emotional freedoms that I had enjoyed in my life as a woman. And not just the loss, but the active squelching of those freedoms in the name of masculine order, reserve, and isolation, as well as homophobia. I could see that The abbey was indeed a very hard place to be a woman, as I could see, as Virgil had said, that it was intended to be. But as Ned, I could see that it was also a very hard place to be an emotional man. And in that sense, it was not so unlike the outside world after all. This is not to say that I did not also find peace, deep love, and elevation of the soul in that place. I did. It was unmistakably present to anyone willing to receive it. And if my experience had been as one-sided as the likes of Father Jerome could have made it, I would not have become emotionally embroiled as I did. Virgil and Felix and Claude and Henry and Father Fat, among others, were profound human beings who gave me the great gift of genuine contact. They struggled, of course, with masculine as well as everyday human troubles, but they burned very brightly at their cores. They were good people concerned about the well-being of their fellow creatures, trying to contribute what they could do to the spiritual awakening of those around them. I came to care deeply about them, and since leaving, I have corresponded with several of them as myself. I am told that the general reaction in the community to the news that I was a woman was mostly amusement and some embarrassment. But when it came down to it, I was a minute disturbance, a short episode, and a very long stay. I was there for no time at all, and they were there for life. I miss the monks often. I miss taking long walks around the grounds with them and alone, looking for the elusive great horned owls who, who reputedly made their nest at the top of the cloister tower. I often heard them hooting at dusk, and I spent many evenings after Vespers following their calls, hoping to see them as perch, but never succeeding. On my last night there, I went in search of Father Claude's beehives instead. Out of the back of the orchard, in a low branch of one of the pecan trees, I saw an abandoned wasp's nest, and I was only about 7 feet away as at most as I peered at it in the dimming light, wondering if Father Claude had seen this. But as my eyes focused, I realized that I was not looking at a hive or a nest at all. It was the body of a very large owl. He was napping, his eyes closed, his body swayed ever so slightly as the branch creaked in the evening breeze. I must have stood there for a good minute, amazed. Then sleepily he opened his eyes and saw me standing there, way too close for comfort. A look of actual surprise registered on his face, and then a vague annoyance. He stared back at me for a few seconds, pondering. It almost seemed how a clod-hopping human had managed to sneak up on him. Then disdainfully, he spread his massive wings and flew away. That is chapter 5, guys. We are finished with chapter 5, titled Life. The next chapter next week will be chapter 6, which is work. To kind of summarize this chapter, in my opinion, right? The things she was observing, right? The things that bothered her, the things that hit her at the core, right? Were the things that women emotionally usually look for within social circles, right? That's why they seem so apparent to her, because these things that women say they're better at, right? The nurturing, the emotional support, the things of this nature, right? These are the things that they, as a woman, supposed to provide their men with, right? And it's crazy how, and shout out to Fatty, because he always says this. So shout out to Fatty, my boy Team Fatty, right? You notice how in these conversations, right, especially with the conversations that she has as far as things need to change, why is it that men can accept women, right? When she tells them what's going on, right? When she tells the guys that she's been lying, right? That she's a woman, right? That she's not gay. She's not gay in the way they think, but a lesbian. They accept her as she is, right? They accept her, they forgive her. But the things that men have set in place, right? The things that men go through to keep the society intact, to keep, especially in this reference of this chapter of the monastery, right? The social structure that they have for the monastery to remain functioning, right? So things don't go awry. Those aren't good enough for her. She has to change those. They have to change those, right? Because it doesn't feel right in her. But when you tell the men what you're doing wrong, the lies you've told, right, the fallacies and the facades you put up, the men forgive you and they take you for who you are. Sounds familiar, guys? Does this sound familiar? On that note, appreciate you guys coming through. You had DJ Wicks Doctor coming through with the $5. Salute Uncle Rick. Congrats to you and the aunt. Bust up. I appreciate you. Another $5 from my boy Ebo Sosa. Happy anniversary. Appreciate y'all, man. 24 years, man. 24 years, man. And that's all I got, man. We'll be back. We'll be back. I don't know what I think I'm gonna do a different live tomorrow. Guys. Look for it in the morning. You're very welcome, Miss Mary. Thank you for sticking around. I appreciate you, sis. I'll make a thumbnail in the morning. Make sure y'all check it out. Right. We'll be back tomorrow live for 2 hours. Probably not even that long. But that's all I got, man. Thank y'all so much. If you want to support me, super chats are always great. Cash apps, $RDubs. Again, thank y'all for rocking out with me. Y'all have a great night. Be safe out there. Take care of yourself and your family, guys. Everything else will take care of itself. Thank y'all so much. Y'all have a great night. I sure appreciate y'all. Pieces.